Welcome to the DNA Talks podcast, where we take on the mission of unlocking the code of your genetics. This season is all about you, upgrading your health, not just on the surface, but down to the root cause. Join us as your clinicians of the DNA Company investigate your DNA and beyond. The intention of this podcast is to enhance your lifestyle by changing what is within your control. This does not substitute the medical advice given by your personal doctor, therapist, or other healthcare professionals.
Well, hello and good day.
Bonjour, bonjour, and bonjour to everyone in our audience. I welcome especially to you, Dr. Varden. It's lovely to see you, in particular in those happy fall colors.
Why, thank you. Yes, it does look very red on camera, but it's actually a nice burnt orange. I do love pumpkin. And this is the season, it's like pumpkin, everything is coming out and being available.
Yes, it is that season where all the spices and all the coffees and all the things that our sweater weather flocks us to. Is fall a favored season of yours? Is this a season that you get excited for?
It really is. I live in the Northeast, and the colors so beautiful. I'm a big person to go hiking in the mountains. And every year I always go climb some mountains, go to the peak, and just look at the glory and beauty around me. It's absolutely gorgeous. And I'll tell you, for those of you who live in other parts of the country, if you ever get a chance to visit the Northeast, and we're talking New England, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, that area, it is worth coming to visit. So
love that. I love that. I think fall, especially to your point, for us northern folk, is such a wonderful time to be indulging in the outdoors. And that's a happy little segue to what we're talking about this evening, how we stay healthy for such fall activities like hiking. Yeah.
Well, it's also the time, all the kids going back to school.
And everyone's coming back, right? Everyone's coming back indoors. They've been playing outside all summer, and now we're coming back into quarters and sharing the same air and sharing the same everything. Yeah. So why don't, because you recently have written an article, and a beautiful article that summarizes some thoughts and some tips around transitioning into fall. And so I wonder this evening, maybe if you could start us off by just a few considerations. What happens when fall comes around that actually inspires some of these changes within the body, and possibly in some people, that loss of immunity that will lend to, increased upticks of colds and flus and all the other joyful things that keep us away from hikes.
Well, I will say that one of the biggest changes is in your daylight exposure, temperature. Okay, so even just focusing on those two things and everything that it affects when we're talking about light exposure, vitamin D. Okay. Being able to get out in the sun. We don't spend as much time outside in the fresh air, in the sun, like we do, getting into later spring and into the summer. And, that can really start to downregulate your ability to make vitamin D.
Yeah.
Vitamin D is so very important, for mood. One of the disorders, the seasonal depressive disorder, or, these affective disorders called SAD, or, this is a real thing. And that's because people's vitamin D levels get very low because they are not getting that exposure. And that also works into another gene that we actually cover in our mood and behavior, the BDNF, your brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This works into neuroplasticity, and starts working into mood. The best way to get that upregulated, sunlight, get that in your eyes in the morning. And you can still do that even when it is cold, going to a window inside the house, an open window, or stepping outside. I love, even in winter, I will step outside, standing in the snow and just fresh, crisp air, which also another reason why I love fall. I love that fresh smell, crispness, having that so important. And vitamin D is really important for the gut biome, which we're going to dive into in this webinar because it is so important, so impactful. So we're also talking about, okay, so sunlight, temperatures, what does that affect? That also affects our crops, the foods that we are exposed to. Okay, we're shifting over in our produce. We don't have as much of the spring lettuces and the summer squashes. Now we're moving more into the gourds, into the pumpkins. Moving over into those later season, produce. Which is a whole other thing that I know that we're going to talk about. As we start shifting over, and this is also affecting our sleep patterns. It's getting cooler. We tend to go to sleep a little bit earlier. We tend to not want to get up as early because the sun doesn't come out as much. This can affect our gut biome as well. And also stress. We have to come back to, the stress aspect, which affects our gut biome, which is affected by our light exposure. So there's so many different things that we need to keep in mind and be kind to ourselves because, like we were saying, all the kids going back to school, the matter of stress that is involved with that busier routine and getting ready for holidays.
Yeah. So if I heard you, we're going to kind of focus tonight's conversation on 3 different points. And so if I'm hearing you, we're going to talk around vitamin D, sunlight, and as we shift into fall, the decreasing of D and the increasing of darkness, we're going to talk through foods, that change in what we have available, the seeking of more comfort food. And then lastly, we'll talk around biome and how both of these, vitamin D and food, will influence that as well as the changes to seasons. And so if I've caught that all correctly, all of that goes into how your body is going to be responding to fall, as well as that conversation that your body kind of has with the world as to, am I going to be sick or not, right? I do like to think of that as a conversation, right? Just as our immune system's a very active creature and it has a conversation with the outside world as to, I am able to coexist with you, or I'm feeling a little bit weak and you're going to take over me a little bit. So Dr. Lara, why don't you talk a little bit about why vitamin D is so important and why its decrease as we lose access to the sun can be so impactful to our health, namely our health, that conversation with the world that keeps us healthy.
Well, this really starts with the fact that vitamin D is actually a hormone. It is a very, very important hormone. The fact that it is and impacts over 10% of all of our protein coding genes. There are 22,000, actually more than that, but over 22,000 protein coding genes. So you're looking at over 2,200 genes that vitamin D plays a role in. Some more direct than others, but is very important. The fact that it directly impacts the health of your gut biome. All of these different things. And it works in with your hormones. Okay, so your whole endocrine system, the cortisol, your stress hormone, your actual sex hormones, the ability for strong bones, muscles, brain health, all of these different things. Vitamin D is important, but also all the studies that are out there that have shown the importance of vitamin D levels when it comes to health and the immune system. They're usually levels that they have found when you start hitting around 50 nanograms per milliliter. That seems to be, one of those magic numbers that you're less likely to be hospitalized or have more severe issues. Now, obviously, this is just one marker. It's not the magic marker that, says, oh, if you only have this, then you won't be hospitalized. So I'm not saying that. It's just that in the studies, they have looked at different levels, blood levels for, different vitamins, for different aspects. And that happened to be something that was a trend. people who recovered more quickly, that they had higher vitamin D levels.
Yeah, I think this was popularized a lot, when we went into COVID, and there was a lot of very tangible data that said, people who contracted COVID, their outcomes were better when their levels were at a certain point. And again, to your point, there's other factors that played into that, but that was one of the bigger ones, which popularized vitamin D within every media outlet as an intervention. Yeah, so I like that. So is it a fair statement to say, there's almost encouragement to people to go get their levels checked now before we head into that season? And if they're not sitting in and around that 50 mark, right, working with their doctor to adjust, is that good counsel?
Oh, absolutely. And actually, the 50 nanograms per milliliter is the lower level. If you really want to get more into optimal, you're looking more at 70, 80, even 90 grams per milliliter. So absolutely check that, because if you are on the low side, this is usually the time that those levels get lower. So we want to make sure to bring it up, into a better reference range, into the optimal range, to carry you through, this cold and flu season, through the darker, less sunlight time. So absolutely, it's always good to know where you're starting from, and, you can make more personalized adjustments.
Yeah. And I like that idea of personalized in particular, because we look at a suite of 3 genes right now that examine how your body converts, carries and uses your vitamin D. And along those parameters, everyone can be individual. So I think in particular for people who are struggling to get their vitamin D up, or struggling to utilize it, knowing your genes can also guide with your doctor how that supplementation is, and how aggressive, in particular, how concerned you need to be with getting those numbers up there. Right.
And I do want to add the fact that knowing the variants of the genes that you have, of the 3 genes, so that's your CYP2R1, which is the conversion from D2 to D3, your GC gene, which is also the vitamin D binding protein gene, which is the transport, of the D3 to the cells and tissues, and also your vitamin D receptor gene. How well is that vitamin D actually getting into the cell and working its magic? Knowing that, how well you do or don't do any one of those 3 things can help determine the type of dosing, the amount of dosing, how that should be structured. This really works into that personalization, because it's not just like, oh, take 10,000 IU of vitamin D, once a day. Well, that can be okay, but some people might need it to be structured a little differently for optimal results.
Yeah, I like that. I like that concept of personalization. And so on that note, I wonder, because I'm seeing some questions around vitamin D supplementation and food. Can we get it through food? So I wonder if we can start happily transitioning into that conversation of food right now, because to your comment around the gourds, all our happy little pumpkin friends, not only does the food that we have naturally available to us start to change based on the growing season, right? Our cravings start to change a little bit. Before we dive into the serious, what's your big fall craving? What do you crave most?
I love pumpkin. I do.
Are you a pumpkin pie person?
I do. I make an incredible pumpkin pie. And there's actually a little secret ingredient that gives it that nice little extra kick. Everyone who's ever had my pumpkin pie.
Are you going to spill the beans? Are you going to spill the beans? What's that secret ingredient?
Pepper. Fresh ground pepper.
I like that idea. I like that idea a lot, actually. So you heard it first here, team.
Yes.
So why don't we talk about this idea that as we're transitioning into fall, right? I think there's a very natural increase of appetite, right? And this is over and above what we might naturally see a person, we know there's genes that curate how much of a snacker, how hungry, how satisfied you're going to be. But almost universally, most people, as they transition to fall, they're wanting different foods. Do you want to speak a little bit to that? And in particular, the impact that change can have on the immune system?
Absolutely. So again, what I had mentioned in the beginning is that our produce, okay, the crops that are generally coming around this time of year are generally a bit heavier. They, are focused more on a little more calorically dense foods. Okay. Again, your gourds, oh gosh, some of the fruit. I mean, actually berries. A lot of the berries are really ripe. I mean, strawberries have pretty much passed, but we're still getting some of those rich berries. And when you consider in nature, those animals that hibernate, bears, what do? They eat a lot of berries and, fish and other things that they catch and capture because they have, fructose, they have these sugars, and that helps to put on fat. And those sugars, because they need that to store during the winter. They are not moving around as much. They are not, obviously full hibernation, but, for other animals eating this way, they're not out hunting. The food is more sparse, so they need to be a little thicker in the waistline. And we're not much different. There's still a lot, genetically speaking, that we have those tendencies, and it is the foods that are available for us as well. So you figure, from eons back in human beings, when we got into agriculture, so it's not just hunters and gatherers, even though the berries, the nuts, okay, these are part of the hunting and are part of the gathering aspect. But even in the nuts, these, which you see a lot of now, and as we move into fall, high in fat. Okay. So again, we go into a partial hibernation as well.
Yeah. I think as I was listening to you, as I was listening to the foods you were listing, a lot of those foods were, yes, higher in calories in the sense they have good fats and they have good carbohydrate, but they're also foods that are coupled to really good complex fibers, meaning you're not getting a sugar hit per se as you consume foods, even though the modern equivalent as we start to head into sweater weather tends to be those lattes and those cookies and those things. And here's the tricky of this, right? We have, as Dr. Lara has just explained, we have this natural tendency to go clawing for the foods that are rich in comfort, right? Rich in all the nutrients, right? And that translates in modern society to cookies and lattes and things, but those aren't coupled with fiber. And so they tend to spike your sugar. And this is something, if you're thinking of how do I avoid getting sick during this transition season, hear me when I say this, because this is a very important point. When you consume something very sugary and you get that blood sugar spike, for approximately 2 to 3 hours after that, your immune system is compromised, namely your white blood cells and all the other happy little things that float around your body protecting you, those fighters of your immune system, they're depressed. They're actually lowered for 2 to 3 hours. So when you consume that latte, that cookie, whatever it might be, it's actually depressing your immune system and making you more susceptible, right? That conversation that we talked about your body having with the world, am I going to be healthy? Am I going to be sick today? It shifts that. It makes it more difficult for you to be healthy, right? And that in combination with the fact that often, again, because it's getting chilly, we want to be cozy. We're having that latte, that cookie with friends in an enclosed environment with other people who might be coughing and, spreading other things. So it's something as natural as it is to want those cozy foods. Be mindful of the cozy foods that you're selecting. Right? We don't necessarily want to fight nature. It's going to be cold. We want to get ready for that, but we don't want to get ready for it in a way that gets us sick. Is that a fair statement there?
Absolutely. And when you consider that your immune system, 70% of your immune system is from your gut.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And when you are eating high sugary foods, let's get that out. When you are taking in these higher sugary foods or higher starch foods, which a lot of these root vegetables are. Okay. Yes, you have the fiber, but they convert. There's still a lot of sugar there. It affects the gut biome by increasing or feeding more of the pathogenic species, specifically Candida. These organisms thrive on sugar, and they can actually outcompete beneficial bacteria. That leads to that imbalance in the gut known as dysbiosis. So you also consider that any kind of excess sugar consumption, this changes diversity in good gut bacteria like your bifidobacteria, lactobacilli. These are really important for maintaining that healthy gut environment. They help aid in digestion. They help support the immune system, which I had already mentioned. But also the fact that when you are eating higher sugar foods, this is increasing your inflammation. It's triggering that inflammatory response. When you're doing that, that is, compromising and putting more energy into your immune system to have to deal, with the impact of these inflammation responses due to an increase in pathogenic species that it has to try to manage. So, and that can, go through a whole aspect of health issues, including your metabolic disorders, immune disorders, gastrointestinal disorders, things, leading to leaky gut, so, it really can, trigger a whole cascade of issues.
Yeah. And I think at some point in time, especially with kind of the chronic inflammation and the shift in bacteria within the gut, right? Then it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy insofar as you change your biome, not only are you depressing immune and creating inflammation, you're also fostering and enabling a community that is sending signals to your brain of, hey, we want to be fed, so you should be having these very starchy, high carb foods because that's what feeds them. It's a little bit of a tricky self-fulfilling cycle that, it's helpful to be prepared as you come into fall. You already know, based on what Dr. Lara said, the change in light, things that naturally we've evolved to want more nourishing foods, right? If you're ready for that, as well as if you're aware of the genes that influence your appetite, right? So shout out to people with FTO, shout out to people with MC4R, those guys that really influence appetite and satiety. It says you go into the season, go in with awareness, a humanity, a humility, a gentleness of course I'm going to be craving these foods, but maybe go in with a strategy of, instead of this cupcake, instead of this muffin, I am instead going to be reaching for this stew, right? That stew is nutrient dense. That stew is something that will support your bacteria. That stew is something that is not going to cause all the havoc, the immune havoc that Dr. Lara just mentioned, right? Part of why we're hosting this, before we hit fall. Words are not working today before we get there, right? So you can think ahead, right? Instead of beating yourself up later and being in this cycle of your gut bacteria signaling to your brain of you want more cookies.
Yeah. And trust me, I understand how difficult it can be, when you are starting to get together with people, being indoors. We've got Halloween coming, but we're talking about fall. We are talking about, that it's like candy everywhere. You start having more get-togethers, getting ready for Thanksgiving. And it's like everybody's got sweets and goodies and baked goods and this and that. And it can be so hard to say no, and to do that. But there are things that you can do. And, it's not just saying the no, but if you are going someplace and bringing baked goods, make a healthier version or have some healthier versions at home. Instead of using sugar okay, using a type of natural sweetener, stevia, the erythritol, xylitol, although be very careful with xylitol if you have pets, especially dogs, because that is deadly. Allulose, I found that is wonderful for baking. Some others are not so great for baking, but when you start shifting over, then you're not getting that heavy sugar load, but you can still have a little bit of the sweet. Changing over a little bit of the ingredients to more healthful choices, you can have your cake and eat it too. Really.
Yeah, and I find at least my strategy walking into a lot of this, so as many people know, I'm the resident celiac, and so when I go to these events, a lot of the treats I can't even eat, right? And then when I do, they'll have something super sugary because that tends to be the substitute, right? If we can't give you wheat, we'll just give you pure sugar. And so my strategy walking into this is I always ensure that I have a really, really, really nourishing meal before, high in protein, high in fat. And then that way I start the signals to my brain of like, hey, you're full and good. So I'll go and I'll still have some of those treats, right? People went out of their way to make sure that I would have something that is gluten-free, exceptionally kind. I want to be part of community. But that craving that I experience isn't there because I've already nourished my body beforehand, right? I love this kind of joint strategy, right? Of nourish, so your body's not craving, it's honoring this change of season. And then separate to that, because you're going to be wanting it, as Dr. Lara says, change up how you do some of your baking, or as you order or buy foods, whatever that looks like, right? Change that up, get ready for it. So it's not something that you're having to deal with, in the moment and using willpower, because good Lord knows I don't have a lot of willpower. I plan my way out of needing willpower.
Although I will say, a couple of things like you were mentioning, have a little something before you go to these events.
Mhm.
But also a glass of water with apple cider vinegar in it, a tablespoon. That actually helps before you eat or before you go, because it will help regulate your blood sugar. So if you do happen to take a few bites of something, at least that can, help so you're not spiking your blood glucose. So, that is an aspect that can be helpful. So what else, Dr. Kostroman, would you say would be good to know when it comes to diet, the biome, and the immune system? Because remember, we are coming into cold and flu season, seeing the grandkids, even if you don't have kids right now, of that age going to school, you're going to be visiting family on holidays. And of course, kids are little petri dishes of everything.
Yeah, I think one thing to consider, or at least one thing that I think through when I think of biome and diet, right? I think of as the seasons changed, as you've mentioned, the produce and the food available and the plants change, so do the molds and the bacterias and things which populate the air and that we breathe in or that our skin comes into contact, right? So as the season changes, so does the biome profile of the outside world, and therefore the biome profile within you will also shift. So for some people, this can be more problematic, in particular, people who struggle with seasonal allergies, right? In particular, while this isn't a gene that's ubiquitous with seasonal allergies, something that definitely aggravates it, shouts out to the people who struggle with mold, GSTP1, as in Peter 1, people with suboptimal presentations there, people with seasonal allergies, right? While it may not necessarily be a cold or a flu that they're going to be walking into, right? Because of the biome shift in the environment, they're either going to experience allergies, or separate to that, that biome shift within the gut may encourage a cold or a flu because it's not a favorable change within. So when I think about going into fall, I first think about, do you have allergies? Do you have seasonal allergies? If you do, let's start thinking about how we support and address that, right? And then part of that supporting and addressing, especially to the idea of diet, is really learning how your body responds to different foods. You mentioned as we go into fall, you're going to want more of the sugar foods, which feed candida, right? And so if you're in that space where, you're either prone to candida or allergies are putting you at a disadvantage, right? Thinking through foods that are going to be high in yeast and maybe for the season, taking them out, right? I think through that prevention lens, right? Because you want to get to a point where you're not treating the cold. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. I think maybe we talk about a few of our favorite cold remedies, right? And what we do to prevent. But we want to get to a point where you're not addressing the cold, instead you're preventing it. So allergies, be it food allergies, things that you're consuming that are aggravating, or separately addressing how your body is experiencing the environmental shift. Yeah, that would be my first thought when I think through how do we ready our biome? How do we ready our diet as well?
And I do want to say that don't be afraid of the food, the produce that is plentiful in the fall. Like I said, one of my favorite things are pumpkin. Pumpkin's rich in vitamin A. Okay. Mm-hmm. It aids in the production of white blood cells. Those strengthen the immune system. So adding pumpkin to your diet, like making pumpkin soups, roasted pumpkins, pumpkin smoothies. Okay, so it's not like it has to be, this spiced pumpkin latte that's full of sugars from coffee places that I will not name. It doesn't really have to be that way. I actually make my own pumpkin coffee.
Neat.
Oh, absolutely. I use a base of a coffee that is mold toxin free, organic, that's locally roasted, or that's, that I know that is a clean coffee. Because again, what Dr. Kostroman was talking about, your immune system and molds. Okay. So I have my own coffee, and then I'll add in some, protein powder or a collagen protein, and I actually roast my own pumpkins, organically grown, and I will make a pumpkin puree. It's just pumpkin, and I will add that in. And then to have a little bit of sweetness, I'll use like the stevia or one of these, natural sweeteners, like I had mentioned earlier. Maybe put in a little bit of vanilla. That right there, it's like I just made an incredible, coffee warm, fall yumminess, but it's not full of sugar. It doesn't have those negative side effects. But a few other things. Apples are packed with antioxidants. I grew up in apple country in northern New York. I mean, we were surrounded by apple orchards. And I remember running track and stopping and then, pulling them right off the tree and eating them and getting a stomachache. But it was so good, that, when you talk about apples, these are helping to promote, good gut health, your immune system. And you can put them on so many different things, making them into pies or, maybe a crumble that is more health, focused. It's delicious. Sweet potato, garlic.
I'm curious, Dr. Lara, these recipes, in particular, the one for that PSL variant, are those in the digest, or is that something that you can offer our audience later? I'm sure people would love like a healthier version of the PSL.
Oh, absolutely. It's not in the digest yet, but I actually, you know what? I will make a note to myself. If our little angels in the background can remind me, please, and I will, write something up. And I'll tell you, a lot of times it'll change a little bit, but they're delicious. Absolutely delicious. But yes, I will.
Thank you. Thank you for that service. Yeah. Because everyone's always clamoring for those, and it's hard to find kind of an alternative that sits well with gut and with tongue.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I love that. So, the inevitable happens. We get a cold or a flu. What do we do about it? When the body has a conversation with the environment and, body says, okay, cool, I guess I'm getting sick. What do we do to support that? What do we do to decrease the duration of it? All the fun things. Do you have any tricks or hacks, or what are your favorite go-tos?
Oh, absolutely. Well, this works in not just helping when you actually start getting that tickle and not feeling so hot, but also as a prevention. And it's something I call it my hot honey lemon water with, so what I do is I have my, cup of hot water. I usually squeeze, and I do fresh organic lemon, either a half or a whole, depending on how much water I'm adding. I will do fresh local honey. And that's important because these bees have been pollinating and creating the honey from the local flora, which your environment, which you are breathing in and being exposed to. So this actually helps with your immune system and allergies. Okay. So I get, local honey, and that's, the sweetness is up to you. I mean, I'll do a teaspoon of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I will put in some fresh grated ginger.
Mm.
And I will put like a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. So that is so tasty. You get that warmth, and it's, so many benefits to help boost your immune system, to help clear the gut, the body. And that is one thing. So, you get the warm fluids. Okay. Because teas, hydration is so important when it comes to when you're not feeling well. So having something like the hot honey lemon water with, ginger and apple cider vinegar is excellent. But herbal teas, I mean, there's some wonderful herbal teas that you can get at your local co-op that you can purchase at, any of the stores. But having that, any broths, or broth-based soups, very encouraging for gut health.
My favorite go-tos, especially when I feel that cold just kind of coming on, it's just sitting up here. It hasn't really descended into body. Some of my favorite go-tos, and often they can be tea form, but I love to do elderberry. So elderberry is this really happy, tiny purple berry, and it has something antiviral properties. So what does this mean? It's something you can drink. There's also lozenges, so it can go in either way. And what it does, for lack of, when you take it in and it attaches to your mucous membrane, and it's very, very slippery. And effectively what happens is viruses in particular just can't grasp on. And so does it get rid of the virus? No, but it actually lessens its ability to adhere to your tissues. And, with viruses, what they do is they kind of commandeer your tissue. They take your tissue, the cells of your throat, your nasal passage, etc., and they use them for their own purposes. So if your cells are too slippery, for lack of better phrasings, for the virus to grab onto, it can't commandeer all your cells. So one of my favorites, either in the beginning of a cold or in prevention too, right? If it's slippery, the virus can't come in, right? Oh, we have a little kitty who's saying hi as well. If the virus can't get in. So I will do elderberry, and then also coupled with things like zinc, right? Zinc is something spectacular for the immune system. And separate to that, also will disrupt viral properties, disrupt the machinery of viruses. And therefore, you're going to have to move, Nadal. We have she wants to say hi. Disrupt the machinery of that virus. So the zinc will disrupt the virus, the elderberry will disrupt. So those are things right when you're starting with that cold. And separate to that, a lot of people will do silver sprays, right? That's more from a bacterial perspective, but something that you can spray into your mouth. Something, some people will even do a little bit of a neti pot with some silver, right? Anything that will get into those tissues and disrupt either bacteria or this is Napita, and she's a little tricky one. Disrupt that process, right? So it's not a cure, but it will lessen that burden within the body, right? And then what other things, Dr. Lara, so I love that you said kind of the broths, especially that'll help and fuel, right? Without feeding certain things. What about vitamin C? That's such a popular one, and for good reason. What's the reason? Why is vitamin C so popular when it comes to
Well, this really, it helps. Well, first of all, it's an antioxidant and it really helps to boost your immune system. You know, really, I like to get working into the whole foods first. I mean, yes, if you are coming down with something and you need a bit more aggressive, yes, you can do, vitamin C supplements, but working toward the prevention, having the lemon, hot honey lemon water, eating the citrus fruits, which are still coming from Florida and the other southern states that you can get, for those of us up north, it works really well in conjunction with the whole aspect of gut health, supporting your detox pathways, which, by the way, checking if you've done your DNA 360 reports, there is a particular gene that actually looks at your vitamin C, the way that you transport process, the way you use that. And that's actually the SLC23A1 gene. There we go.
So I'm really impressed. I would not have remembered that number letter combination.
Yeah, you can actually find that in your diet nutrition reports, as well as in the antioxidation. It's in the anti-inflammation reports as systems. So you can just take a look at that. So again, you are looking at the SLC, which is short for solute carrier gene, 23A1. So, but that lets you know how well are you, converting and working with your vitamin C. Because, if you don't do that very well, it might be something that you do have to take vitamin C supplementation, to help with your immune system, maybe foods, citrus fruits, the vegetables that are higher in vitamin C are just not enough for you. So that's going to be very important.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah, no, I think I really like that you kind of brought that back to let food be your medicine, seek it first from food, right? Because I think vitamin C, let's not discount how strong in particular when you're sick, like a mega dose of that can be, right? And it's important to think about all the other polyphenols that your food will bring in that support the action of that vitamin C. But I think just on the note of vitamin C, for when you are sick, when that inevitably does happen, your bowel tolerance for vitamin C will increase. That is how important vitamin C is to your body. So what do I mean by that? Bowel tolerance. Normally, when you take vitamin C, there's going to be a point where you lose bowel tolerance. What does that mean? You take too much, you're effectively going to be pulling so much water into your GI tract that you're going to have exceptionally loose stool. You're going to possibly get some cramps and your gut's not going to be happy, and you will have very loose stool. And that's a very polite way of saying diarrhea, right? Because you've put too much vitamin C, which draws water into the bowel and then therefore increases that looseness of your stool. So most people usually have a bowel tolerance of 2, maybe 3 grams within their bowel when they're healthy and happy, right? That's a happy medium. When you get sick, when your body's aware that we actually need this additional vitamin C support to support our immune cells, to support the repair in particular, right? We know that bacteria and virus destroy our cells. Your tolerance for vitamin C goes up. So let's pretend you have a day-to-day tolerance of 2 grams, right? You take 2 grams and your gut's fine. 3 grams, your gut's not okay. People when sick can actually increase that to 3, sometimes even 4 grams. So the body very naturally knows vitamin C is important to its immune function. And when ill, we want to recruit the important things. So just another thought. In particular, I think a lot of people, when they're ill, they're not necessarily feeling up for food. That's where the broth becomes really important. And that's where possibly additional supplementation of vitamin C is, because that's going to further support the repair and the abilities within the body. Yeah.
That just goes to show you the brilliance of our grandmothers and great grandmothers. When we got sick,
Yeah.
they make homemade chicken soup, the bone broths.
Yeah.
It's like they knew, and now science has proven that, that scientific support of that information. I did want to mention about the zinc that I loved how you had mentioned that early on. But even if it is, working into the time that, you're maybe getting close to almost a week in to being sick, one of the things that viruses do, they'll actually get into the cells and take over and use the mechanisms of the cell to make more of themselves. Well, something that zinc does, zinc actually helps to block that replicative process. But zinc can't get into the cells all by itself. It needs an ionophore. It needs something to get it from outside the cell into the cell. That's what a zinc ionophore is. And a very good zinc ionophore, NAC, N-acetylcysteine, actually helps to do that. N-acetylcysteine is also a great antioxidant. It also is a precursor for glutathione, which is your master antioxidant of the body, that molecule that helps made in the liver and helps to move things out and to get, those toxins out of the body. So, you want to be able to stack the deck in your favor. So that way you can handle these things. And I love the fact of the silver, with the sprays, even rinsing your mouth, maybe even putting some in a nebulizer or a neti pot, a nasal lavage, because the silver also helps to remove the substrate, that area that bacterium and other things tend to grow on. If you take that away, they can't do that. So that actually helps, so I wanted to bring that up. Also, making sure that you have steam. If you're not feeling well, a lot of times our immune system, you'll start getting stuffy. You can't breathe. Okay, this is where the hot showers, doing any type of moist air, humidifying, reducing that congestion, soothing any dry or irritated sinuses. Because remember, it's getting colder outside. What are we doing? We're turning on the heat. What does that create? It dries out the humidity in our inside of the homes goes down, so it's drier. So we will tend to not have that moisture. The mucous membranes tend to dry out a little bit. So we want to make sure that we have that. So that's where humidifiers, also doing things like salt gargles, when you start not feeling so well, that warm salt water can actually help soothe your throat, helps reduce the inflammation, loosen up any mucus, flushing out the bacteria and the viruses from the throat. So these are some other ideas that you can use.
Thank you. Thank you. I love that bridging of new and old, and like why the old in particular. Here's the science as to why it's brilliant. Dr. Lara, do you have any other thoughts in the sense of, do you have any other favorite tools or things that you do this time of year as you transition seasons?
Well, I would say there is definitely a change in my diet. I really like to try to eat seasonally, and this is kind of coming full circle to what we were talking about, really working in the foods that our garden is producing, the pumpkins, the apples, sweet potatoes, kale. If you've got, pomegranates, you'll start seeing in the stores, of course, then again, if you live out in like Arizona or some of these others, they have pomegranate trees. And so
fly me in and I'll pick from your pomegranate trees. It's fine.
Absolutely. So, really making use and getting, these wonderful vitamins, nutrients, fibers into your body, so doing that shift, but, eating seasonally. I will say, for cleanses, I'm going to shift over about cleansing your environment. Kind of like a spring cleaning to do a fall cleaning, because here we've had the windows opened for, the summertime when there's dust. And of course, summertime is construction time. It seems like that's when they're doing all the.
Do you live in Toronto too?
And oh goodness heavens, it's something that, again, yes, our windows are open. We love the fresh air, but it can also, bring in, wonderful little ants and bugs and other things that, we don't want staying for the winter. Doing, again, something like a spring cleaning, but to a fall cleaning, to have things fresh, to start changing over even some of the decorations, some of the color schemes, of the house. And that creates a lightness, a happiness, because one of the things I had mentioned at the very beginning was stress. Okay. How do we lower stress? How about being grateful, finding the joy, doing some fun activities with the family? Like this coming week, we are actually going to a local farm, bringing my granddaughter to go apple picking and see the goats and just kind of be there. That's enjoyable. Finding the joy in your life, cleansing from one season to the next, and finding gratefulness, because it's very hard to be depressed and stressed when you are grateful and joyful. So that's how I will bring that around.
I love that. So a cleanse, not only of body, but a cleanse of perspective and mind. And I think that is such a perfect way to honor and close our time up today. And so for those in particular that held on to the very end, we are grateful for you. Thank you for spending your time with us. Thank you for offering us your curiosity. And Dr. Lara, thank you so very much for your time and expertise and your very beautiful, passionate explanations as things change, what we can do to support the body during those changes, so it becomes a cozy fall season as opposed to a sick in bed fall season. So thank you so very much. Thank you to our audience. We're really grateful for you, and we hope that this is helpful and that you enjoy a cozy fall. We will see you same bat time, same bat channel, different night though.
Yes. And thank you so much for all of your wisdom and input. Always, always a pleasure.
All right.
Everyone.
Au revoir, mes amis.
Have a good day.
Au revoir.